Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. Currently, we are in Joshua chapter 9 and going over the conquest of Israel. Joshua had three prime directives, commands, purposes, right? 1, bring the people into the promised land. 2, conquer the promised land. And 3, divide the land up. We're currently, of course, in the conquest stage as he is conquering. Now, this is going to be an interesting one. We see where Joshua will make a mistake. And it's going to result in not conquering someone who should have been conquered, but because of the oath that they give, then and the covenant that they give, they must honor it. That will later lead to Joshua having to defend, and this is interesting. The Gibeonites were going to come and deceive the people of Israel, saying that they were far land. They're going to have this really simple kind of ruse. The reason why this is important is because, on the one hand, you in a sense can't blame them, because they're going to see we're going to get conquered, so let's make a covenant. They deceived them. And it's going to be Joshua's fault for not, one, seeking God, and then checking out their claims that they're making. So let's get into it. Joshua chapter 9, it says, when all of the kings heard about Jericho and Ai, those who were west of the Jordan in the hill country, in the Jordan foothills, and all along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea towards Lebanon, the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and the Jebusites. They formed a unified alliance to fight against Joshua and Israel. Now, again, classic example of the hardness of the heart. In other words, they know, hey, these people are some bad people. Their God is on their side, but notice, instead of humbling themselves, they're going to fight. Look at verse 3. But when the inhabitants of the Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they acted deceptively. They gathered provisions and took worn-out sacks on their donkeys, old wineskins, and cracked and mended. They wore old patch sandals on their feet, and threadbare clothing on their bodies. The entire provision of bread was dry and crumbly. They went to Joshua in the camp of Gilgal, and said to him and the men of Israel, we have come from a distant land. Please make a treaty with us. So on the one hand, you kind of have to commend them for two reasons. One, they saw that we're going to get conquered, so let's make a treaty. Instead of fighting against them, let's make a treaty. Verse 7, the men of Israel replied to the Hivites, perhaps you live among us. How can we make a treaty with you? They said to Joshua, we are your servants. Then Joshua asked them, who are you and where did you come from? They replied to him, your servants have come from a far away land because of the reputation of the Lord your God, for we have heard of his fame and all he did in Egypt. See, this is why what they actually did was actually commendable. Notice this. So verse 10, and all that he did to the two Amorite kings beyond the Jordan, Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, who was in the Ashtoreth. See, our elders and all of our inhabitants of our land told us, take provisions with you for the journey and go and meet them and say, we are your servants. Please make a treaty with us. Now, another thing, notice he's saying that we're going to be your servants. Now, had they known the God of Israel, had they came truthfully, God probably would have said they could still be your servants. Okay. Verse 12. This bread of ours was warm, and we took it from our house as food on the day we came to you. Take a look, and now dry and crumbling. These wineskins were new when we filled them, but look, they're cracked, and these clothes and our sandals of ours are worn out from extremely long journey. Then the men of Israel took some of their provisions, but did not seek the Lord's counsel. So Joshua established peace with them and made a treaty to let them live, and our leaders of the community swore an oath to them. So this was a mistake. Not the worst thing that Joshua can do, but it certainly was a mistake, since God had told them not to make treaties with the people of the land. Now, on the other hand, had the people of the land been truthful, God would have had mercy on them. And we don't, in other words, they could not probably keep the land, but God made them. Certainly, He made them. He would have had mercy on them. But on the other hand, see, they did not know the God of Israel, but they were witnessing His works. So they did humble themselves. So God would have had mercy on them. Verse 16. 3 days after making the treaty with them, they heard that the Gibeonites were their neighbors, living among them. So the Israelites set out and reached the Gibeonite cities on the third day. Now their city was Gibeon, Chephirah, Beeroth, and Kibroth, and Kirithim Jearim. Sorry for the mispronunciation of the names. Verse 18, but the Israelites did not attack them because the leaders of the community had sworn an oath to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. And then the whole community grumbled against the leaders. Now they kind of grumbled because you guys messed up. And remember too, when you made a vow, the covenant, you had to honor it. They would have been more guilty from the Lord had they broken the vow. Verse 19, all the leaders answered them, we have sworn an oath to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. Now we cannot touch them. This is how we will treat them. We will let them live so that no wrath will fall on us because of the oath we swore to them. They also said, let them live. So the Gibeonites became woodcutters and water carriers for the whole community, as the leaders had promised them. In a sense, they kind of became their laborers. Verse 22, Joshua summoned the Gibeonites and said to them, why have you deceived us by telling us you live far away from us, when in fact you live among us? Therefore you are cursed and will always be slaves, woodcutters and water carriers for the house of my God. Now it's kind of interesting because the house of the Lord would not come for another 400 years plus. Okay. The Gibeonites answered him, it was clearly communicated to your servants that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the lands before you. We greatly feared for our lives because of you, and that is why we did this. Now we are in your hands. Do to us whatever you think is right. This is what Joshua did to them. He delivered them from the hands of the Israelites, and they did not kill them. And on that day, he made them woodcutters and water carriers, as they are today, for the community of the Lord, for the community and for the Lord's altar at the place he would choose. Kind of interesting. As I said, on the one hand, I would commend them for this. And you kind of have to understand that they did not know the Lord. God is the God of the earth. He is the God. He is God of creation. And understand that as we are studying the scriptures, we're looking at the scriptures from the perspective of its narrative that's focused on Israel. So outside of Israel, Remember, you got a whole world going on, countries, nations, people, various people like that. And as I said, had they known the Lord, God would have had mercy on them. And so on the one hand, it's kind of commendable that they were able to say, well, wait a minute, we want to be on God's side, right? They just did it deceptively. So really the fault here is more on Joshua and them by not seeking the Lord. And God would have told them, these people, they're your neighbors. But also God would have given them his counsel. Here's what you do with them since they did humble themselves. All right, chapter 10, verse 1. Now, Adoni, Zedek, king of Jerusalem. Now, what's interesting here is that Jerusalem now was a pagan city. David would later, this is some 400 years from now, David will capture Jerusalem, and then Jerusalem will become the great city. So now Adoni Zedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had captured Ai and completely destroyed it, treating Ai and its king as he had Jericho and its king, and that the inhabitants of Gibeonites had made a peace with Israel and were living among them. Now this is really kind of a no-no. It shouldn't have never happened, but again, that was Joshua's fault. But they would notice they were living among them. Verse 2 says, so Adoni Zedek and his people were greatly alarmed because Gibeon was a large city, like one of the warrior cities. It was larger than Ai, and all its men were warriors. Now this is kind of interesting that Gibeon was they probably could have, if they had hardened their heart, could have said, we could take them. But here, what's amazing about this city was that they were actually larger than Ai. But they still said, hey, you know what? They got the true living God. Verse 3, therefore, Adoni, Zedek, king of Jerusalem, sent word to Hoham, king of Hebron, Pariam, king of Jarmuth, and Japhia, king of Lachish, and Dabri, king of Eglon, saying, come up, help me. We will attack Gibeon because they have made a peace with Joshua and the Israelites. So the 5 Amorite kings, the king of Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon, joined forces, advanced with their armies, besieged Gibeon, and fought against it. Now, what we see is that Gibeon was a large city, and that's why you see this great show of force here. But they humbled themselves before Israel. So, verse 6, then the men of Gibeon sent word to Joshua to the camp of Gilgad, don't abandon your servants. Come quickly and save us. Help us. For all of the Amorite kings living in the hill country have joined forces against us. So Joshua and his whole military force, including all the fighting men, came to Gilgad. Now remember, they had to come because they had made a treaty of peace. The Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid of them, for I have handed them over to you. None of them will be able to stand against you. Now, they were going to conquer this land anyway. These were lands they were going to conquer. Verse 9. So Joshua caught them by surprise after marching all night from Gilgal, and the Lord threw them into confusion before Israel. He defeated them with a great slaughter at Gibeon, chased them through the ascent of Beth-horon, and struck them down as far as Azekah and Makkedah. As they fled before Israel, the Lord threw large hailstones on them from the sky, and hailstones on them from the sky along the descent of Beth-horon all the way to Azekah, and they died. More of them died from the hail than from the Israelites than the Israelites killed with the sword. Verse 12. On that day, the Lord gave the Amorites over to the Israelites. Joshua spoke to the Lord in the presence of Israel. Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and the moon over the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, until the nation took vengeance on its enemies. It is written in the book of Jezar. So the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed its setting almost a full day. And there has been no day like it before or since, when the Lord listened to the voice of man, because the Lord fought for Israel. Then Joshua and all of Israel with him returned to the camp of Gilgal. Now this is kind of an amazing thing here. This is an amazing thing. So two things here. I'm going to come out of this. I think I'm going to pick it up with this the next study, the rest of this chapter. So there are two things that's going on here with this great defeat, with these 5 kings of the Amorites that attacked Gibeon. Gibeon itself was a large city, and so, but they saw, and let me just say this: only God could have given them this perception, but they were able to see. Israel's going to win this because they have God on their side. That in itself is an amazing perception that comes from a humble heart. And one of the things that I've always prayed, thanking God for his mercy on me, and I continue to pray, keep me that way. I don't know how that works. The hardness of the heart. And as I said, we're going to see this throughout the entire study of the entire Bible. The hardness of man's heart. The sinful hardness of man's heart. But so there are two things that happens here that is astounding in terms of the war. One, you see this rain of hailstones. Now we'll see this later on, or I should say, you can see this later on if you read the book of Revelations. One of the last plagues during the period of time in Revelations chapter 16, hailstones weighing almost 100 pounds will be thrown down on the army of the Antichrist, or the man of the beast. And we see it here that these were such large hailstones that the people died more from the hailstone than from the sword. But another thing is that notice that Joshua was able to have the sun stand still. Now, translating into modern day, the rotation of the earth stopped long enough. You know, as we know from science, which is amazing, our earth, right, in actuality, orbits around the sun. And as the earth is orbiting around the sun, the earth itself is spinning. Now, we know that now over the process of astrology. So as the earth is making its rotation around the sun, as its own orbit stops as it's facing the sun. Now, I believe that the planet Venus does that as we speak, that the planet Venus, which is closest to the sun, continually just, it's one side is facing the sun and one side does not, and it just rotates around. Now, there are people who say that that's impossible, and my response to whenever a person says that's impossible is, how big is your God? See, how big is your God? So, in other words, these things are not a big deal to God, since He created the orbits, He created the universe. They're not that big deal. So, But it is an amazing story where the sun set for almost a day, he said, and then kind of resumed. Okay, so all right, guys, we're gonna pick it back up in chapter 10 in our next study. All right.